Set your course for the Hoth
Takes podcast.
Welcome to Hoth Takes. I'm Eric Geller.
I'm Grace Seegers.
And I'm Haley Bird-Wilt.
And we're thrilled to be back with you discussing the final two episodes of The Acolyte. This is where everything really comes together. We find out the truth about the dark secret on Brendok, and then we go back to Brendok for a big confrontation as the truth catches up with our main characters. I want to start by talking about Osha's turn to the dark side. I think is a fair way to describe it here. In the final episode, Saul arrives, they have a confrontation, and she kills him, force chokes him to death, kills him without a weapon, I guess you could say. And as I was watching this scene, which is clearly a pivotal moment for Osha and the story, I kept thinking to myself, this doesn't feel earned, and it doesn't feel right. And I don't mean right as in like right and wrong, like the dark side and the light side. I mean, it doesn't feel right for her character. I mean, minutes earlier, she's on Chymere's planet saying she's never going to team up with him. She's never going to turn to the dark side. She's not her sister. They arrive at Brendok, and she clearly still detests him and doesn't want to hear from him. And then a few minutes later, we see this rage not come out of nowhere, but reach the point where she's willing to kill her father figure. It didn't feel earned to me, and it didn't feel justified. This is obviously a major part of the wrap-up of the story, and if they get a second season, it'll continue to be a major part of Osha's journey. So I would love to hear from the two of you. Did that work for you? Do you think that the story earned that turn with Osha?
So my biggest complaint with the final episode and with that turn of events feeds into my biggest complaint with the series overall, which is that they compressed too much into too few episodes. 8 episodes just wasn't enough for the kind of character development that they were going for, and it was like speed running a character development in a way that I agree with you, Eric. It didn't feel earned or right. It felt like everything went too quickly. I still think she got over seeing Yord and Jecki killed in front of her a bit too quickly. And that's, like, they could have made that turn work. It just needed 12 episodes instead of 8. The time was too compressed. And we know how Eric feels about flashback episodes in compressed time. So I'm really sounding like Eric here. But they had 2 flashback episodes in an 8-episode season. And they needed more time to tell the story that they want to tell. So I wasn't really convinced by Osha's turn. And not because Amandla Stenberg didn't do a great job, or because, it wasn't a natural turn of events. It's just it happened way too quickly.
There's nothing shameful about sounding like me, by the way. I just want to say that for the record.
You would say that.
I agree with Grace, but I have some bigger complaints, and I'll try to make them just broad, because I just think the writing fell apart at the end. The one thing I will say that I liked was the payoff of what killing a Jedi without a weapon was. I don't know why that was so confusing to me until the end, and I was like, oh, duh. The Force joke. It was
confusing.
It was fun. It was to me, that was a fun little, they've apparently they've been trying to discover this cool trick that we've known about for a long time, and someone did it. Whoa. Okay, I'll give, sure, that's fun. I think the I think my problem is not so much character development. It is the writing and the fact that the Jedi did nothing wrong.
Okay, so let's get into the tone of the show and how we're supposed to feel, because I do want to talk about what happens on Brendok sort of in the flashback episode, because Haley, I think you and I are going to agree on this. And
I guess what I'm just saying is that Osha doesn't have merit. She doesn't have standing to actually go to the dark side over this. She doesn't. But I mean, it's realistic in the sense that people who choose to do evil are often doing it for dumb and bad reasons. So, fine.
Yeah, it's not exactly rational.
Yeah.
Well, and then we get to the question of, does the show want us to sympathize with these characters? Because after Osha kills Sol and she and May and Chimere sort of, escape to that tree from their childhood, it's this whole scene that everything is framed as if these are the heroes, they're the underdogs. The mean Jedi are coming to capture them, and they have finally found each other, and isn't that sweet? And they just need to be able to be left alone so they can go live their lives together. You get this upbeat music. Everything looks so tender and sweet. And to me, that feels like the episode and the show trying to tell us, these are the people you should be rooting for. These are the people who are understandable or on a reasonable path, are behaving reasonably. To me, the biggest flaw in the episode and in the show is not that Osha falls to the dark side with almost no buildup or justification. It's that really the show is trying to get us to sympathize with them. It's putting them in that kind of hero role almost. And the whole show has this problem with how they treat Chimere and May, but it's really at its worst at the end with Osha, trying to make it seem like this is a person we're supposed to root for. And it just blows my mind that we're supposed to root for people who all they do is embrace cruelty and they engage in vengeance. Everything they do is antithetical to Star Wars, and yet we're supposed to celebrate them. We're supposed to cheer for them to escape the Jedi. What is going on here? Am I misreading this, or is this a really problematic tone for the show?
So I think Grace will disagree with you, and Grace, you can speak in a moment. I will say I felt the same way that Eric did in terms of the tone, like the music and the lighting and the I don't know. It does feel like they were trying to do that in a way, and I had given the writers credit in the past of making this kind of messy, nuanced story where everyone's making bad decisions. But this is not a coming of age thing, which is what it seems like at the end. She's found her path. And sure she has, but it's evil. It's objectively evil. It doesn't need to be yay. I think it would be a more impactful story if it actually reckoned with that at the very end. I really didn't like the last episode. And maybe it was just I don't know, whoever directed it or whoever chose the tone of that last episode just didn't really match the rest of the series for me, because I feel like the rest of the series did kind of, have recognize the fact that everybody was being messy and making poor decisions. I don't know. And I think, Grace, what you'll say is the show is not necessarily endorsing the behavior of the characters, but I will say the tone and the music and the writing, the dialogue in that scene is all just dumb, found family, we did it, what are we gonna do next kind of vibe, and it's this is stupid.
Well, look who's about to surprise everyone. It's me agreeing with you.
Oh, okay.
Oh, you think you know me so well. Well, you don't.
Forgive me.
No, I also... that just felt completely tonally weird to me, that scene. And I also kept thinking about, it's still bad that May started the fire. If May didn't start the fire, May didn't start the fire, but May did start the fire.
She did.
Unlike Billy Joel. And if May hadn't started the fire, then none of it would have happened. I do think that the Jedi made some bad decisions in episode 7, but it wasn't bad decisions made out of malice. It was bad decisions made out of recklessness or impatience or desire to go home.
Even that was him being manipulated by her.
Yeah, exact. Very human bad decisions, not... he was manipulated by her in his desire to go home. The Wookiee Jedi, Kelnaka, had his mind taken over. The people who were acting poorly, arguably the Jedi were acting poorly in that they were not fully living up to perfect Jedi ideals, but the people who were acting with malicious intent were the witches. And I felt as if the show didn't really reckon with that. I thought episode 7 was pretty clear in how it laid it out that, okay, the Jedi made mistakes, but totally not at the same level as what the witches were doing. And then episode 8, it kind of undermined that message. And I do believe, that Sol was possessive of Osha, and it was an example of possessive love. And I thought that was really interesting. And I really liked exploring that element of how a really good Jedi could go down that sort of path of possessive love, and have it be a sort of familial love. I thought that was really interesting. But I was really disappointed by how little reckoning there was with the fact that Osha went full bad guy, and it seemed like we were supposed to sympathize with her, or not sympathize with her, because I think all characters in a sense should be sympathetic, but that we were supposed to agree with her. And the best I can say, if I'm being generous, along with a compressed timeline maybe messing with some of that character development, I will say generously, maybe it's a kind of Darth Bane situation where listeners of the pod will remember we read an old Darth Bane book, and that is very much a book about a bad guy, but he's the protagonist, and you're sort of rooting for him in the way that you root for all protagonists while still understanding that they're bad. So if I am being generous, and I'm not saying that this is a convincing argument, I'm saying this is me being generous, that's what they're going for. Maybe they're going for, she's the protagonist, so you want to root for her in that she's the protagonist. But that wasn't how it came across to me.
Yeah, I think, it is just a cautionary tale, really, about how difficult it is to explore nuance. The show really wants to be this bold exploration of, the gray space between Jedi dogma and Sith dogma, and, these aren't the Jedi you thought you knew, and what if the Sith aren't just pure evil? What if they're hurt and they're lashing out in pain? And these are all interesting ideas to explore, but you have to, at the end of the day, come back to the core moral message of Star Wars, which is that the dark side is always wrong. When you embrace it, you are corrupting yourself and you are corrupting people around you. You can't just dip into it just because you're hurt. Your pain is valid, but it does not justify cruelty. That dichotomy of cruelty versus hope versus selflessness, that is the core of Star Wars. And this final episode really muddies the waters there in terms of not just what it shows, but also how it shows it, who it wants you to root for. So that was very disturbing to me. I keep coming back to the scene under the tree because I just kept thinking, are we watching the same show? Like, whoever wrote this scene, did they watch the scenes that were previously shown to us? Because these are not the kind of people you should be presenting in this way. But we could go on probably for hours just complaining about the tone there. I do want to talk a little bit about what we actually saw on Brendok, because first of all, I think you're right. The Jedi are, I think, justified in their concerns, even if how they act is not always justified.
But even how they act, I don't honestly, I'm hard pressed to find something that's truly genuinely wrong other than Soul caring for Osha and trying to get her out of this cult.
I think the real thing is disobeying the council. And by the way, I think it's important that we see that the institutional Jedi Order does not actually want to do the whole neo-colonial break into your house and take your kids, investigate the virgins by all means. There's been a lot of criticism of the Jedi as an order in terms of how they treat other societies that they come into contact with. I think it's very important here that the institution is not advocating for what we see happen, that these are rogue actors. You can make arguments about, well, the order is accountable for the actions of these people, their teaching should be better. We can get into that, that's fair, but this is not the institution saying go do this. And I think, what's really interesting to me is Saul, yes, he has this possessive love for Osha, but he does say, I think the Force wants me to connect with this person, and I kind of believe him. I mean, we know that the Force has a will. We have seen it expressed, and we've seen other characters do what they think is right based on the will of the Force. I don't know why we're going to discount Saul's statement there and say, oh, he's just trying to justify his selfishness. No, I believe that he thinks he's meant to do this, and I also believe if you look at the Coven from the outside, it looks pretty creepy. It looks pretty disturbing. This does not look like a place where children are going to be respected and kept safe. It looks like a place where they're going to be punished and pushed into doing things that they don't want to do. And we see that with Osha. So, yes, this is an outside group coming in and judging a group that they haven't spent this time with, but I don't love the moral relativism of there's just, you could never, ever judge another group of people. There's nothing that's universally unacceptable. I don't love that thought process, and I think a lot of that is what's going into the defense of the witches, and I'm kind of uncomfortable with that.
It's kind of nihilistic, like everyone makes their own meaning kind of thing. There's no morality except what you choose. And like, okay, but that's not really Star Wars.
Yeah, I think my issue with what the Jedi did on Brendok wasn't what they intended to do. I mean, their intentions were pure, and Road to Hell is paved with good intentions and all that, but I think their mistake was just that they were reckless. And I also think that Soul probably felt a connection with Osha. And I think that over the years, as he kept that secret, that's what ate him up. And I think the second big mistake was keeping the secret. They shouldn't have kept the secret. They should have been honest. But I also think Soul wasn't just connected to Osha. There was an indication that he was connected to May as well, because when he kills Mother Anastasia, he sees May and thinks it's Osha. And I just thought, maybe the connection goes beyond just one of the twins. It's connected to them as sort of this whole person that they are in two bodies. But I think the Jedi, like I said before, they weren't malicious. They weren't cruel. They just disobeyed orders and covered it up badly. And I'm not sure if we were intended to take it at the same level as what the witches were doing. I thought after episode 7, it's pretty obvious that there was a lot more nuance there, and that these aren't moral equivalents. But then episode 8 happened. It's well, I don't know what the show wants us to think.
Yeah, I just like the killing blow that is supposed to be the fact that Soul killed Mother Anastasia. It just, she was dissolving to a forced creature, and he was watching that child dissolve. I just think it's I think it's defensible what he did.
Well, let's also keep in mind that she had decided to let Osha go, but she didn't lead with that. She said that as her dying breath, and we're supposed to think, oh, Soul rushed to judgment, and it all would have been fine.
But what was she doing? She was turned into a force cloud. Were they going to continue to exist after they became force clouds? That's my question. And I feel like that's what Soul was worried about. And he was worried for May / Osha, who he thought was Osha.
I just can't get over not saying immediately, yes, Osha can go with you. If you're trying to de-escalate, that's the first thing I would say when I walk into that situation. But instead, she just escalates. It's all, you shouldn't have come here. We're still mad at you. That's fair. You can feel that way. But if your goal is to find a peaceful resolution to this situation, you need to say immediately, I'm granting your request. I'm granting Osha's request. She can go with you. That whole scene, we're supposed to see it as Soul rushing to judgment, being ignorant of another culture, assuming malice just because it looks dangerous to his eyes. No, she had every opportunity to do the right thing, and she didn't. Her actions were actions that anybody could predict would be perceived as aggressive, and we don't know. They might have been aggressive. So she definitely owns that. I'm not putting that on Saul. And again, it's a moment where, Grace, I think you made an interesting point, which is episode 7 seems to make it pretty clear, hey, there's nuance here. These aren't the same levels of mistakes on both sides. I actually think one area where they muddy that is with Anastasia. I think we're supposed to think that perhaps Saul made a mistake in terms of his perception of the situation, and I don't like that. I think it should be clear that what he did was understandable, tragically mistaken, but understandable. I don't know that the episode is framed so that we're supposed to think that, but that's my perception of it.
Eric, has anyone in Star Wars lore turned into a dark force cloud before? Can you help me understand?
I don't think so. Again, this is a group that, from what we are told, is isolated and hasn't been encountered before. And so I don't know that there's evidence that out there of this specific thing happening before. The other thing I'll say is we see Mother Coral do this, and then she takes over Kelnaka's mind. So the question becomes, was Anastasia going to do something similar, or is that just what all their powers look like? They dissolve and then they do whatever they want. But yeah, I don't know. It definitely, to me as a viewer, it looked aggressive, and I think you could understand a person in Saul's situation with all the context around him saying, "This is aggression. I must protect people."
The other thing about like all the witches dying, how were they going to know that like breaking off this, like the fact that they were controlling the Wookiee and like breaking that off was going to kill like all of them? Like what?
So I think this kind of goes back to what you were saying before, Haley, of kind of weak writing. So there's lots of times in this show where something could have just been explained. Like a lot of problems would have been avoided if someone just explained something. If Mother Anastasia said, yeah, we're letting Osha go. If Sol told Osha, yeah, I killed your mom, but here's why. I thought it was defensible, instead of just being like, I did the right thing. And I think, tragedy as a genre is one of the hallmarks of tragedy is that things could have been different if someone had just said something different, but they didn't, and that makes sense. And there's a sort of inevitability to it. And I just didn't think that this was that kind of a well-written tragedy where people didn't explain things and it felt dumb. It didn't feel justified. It felt like, well, that's silly. And I'm not saying that I always want characters to make rational choices, because, human beings don't make rational choices, especially when you're telling this kind of story about the temptations of the dark side. But it should have felt inevitable, like good storytelling. It would have felt inevitable that Osha would have to kill Sol, and that would be the tragedy of it. That would be the tragedy of her fall, kind of like how Anakin's fall is a tragedy. And if he had just, said something different, or if this had happened, it could have been different, but it wasn't. And it feels like it's choice and inevitable at the same time. This just felt like it was a whole bunch of people making bad decisions, and not in an interesting tragedy way, it's not written very neatly, in my opinion.
Do we think as a group that I almost wonder if they like toned down the explanation of what happened on Brendok because they were worried about viewers, but do we think as a group that if the Jedi had been more at fault and if it wasn't just like bumbling around and like active maliciousness by the witches, like would we like the show better? Because the decision making might be more defensible by like Osha in the end. To me, it's like that's the flaw of it. I feel like I wish they had chosen either way, and they didn't.
Honestly, yeah, my biggest flaw is still, I think they could have done it with a longer episode count, and if they had spaced out the story a little bit. But I think that's another way to do it, that if it had been less clear cut, it ironically would have been more clear cut. Like if the Jedi really had been bad, acting truly in a poor way, then yeah, I think you're right, Haley. I think that turn would have made more sense.
And we would have been able to feel a little bit like worse for Osha than we're able to in the story as it was told, because we would understand the pain a little bit more, and it's not like she'd be taking vengeance on a person who was just trying their best. She'd be taking vengeance on a person who was trying their worst, in a sense. The other thing I think is notable here is like Torben, who sets us all off. As you guys said, Mother Anastasia invaded his mind, which is aggressive on its own, but then she also pushes him to go for what he wants, which is to get off the planet. So she is the one who plants the seed that leads to him doing these things. She's not, as I think about it now, she kind of does the opposite of just trying to get the Jedi out of their affairs. She plants a seed in his mind deliberately that leads to him bringing the aggression back to their coven. So, the more you really unpack what happens here, the less the witches look like the victims, which I think the show doesn't want you to think that. I think the show wants you to see them as the victims, because otherwise I don't know how Osha's turn is compelling. And so I think that's all just kind of a house of cards that collapses in on itself because none of it works. But what really bothered me in episode 8 was that Saul doesn't even try to tell Osha the context. They have him talk about it in front of her and to her as if he made a choice to kill Anastasia, and he doesn't regret it. He thinks it was right, but he made the choice to do it. Like, he set out, he was like, I must go to her coven and I must execute her. Like, that is how it reads if you're Osha. And that's obviously not what happened at all. I'm stunned that they had him talk about it in the way that he did, because that extra bit of context might have been enough to make her reconsider. But of course, they can't have that. They need her fall, so they have to write this in a convoluted way. It's just another example of bending everything to fit that turn and taking out so much logic in the process.
I mean, that's what I was saying about how it just felt like not great writing, how it just didn't. It seemed like they're twisting it to fit the narrative rather than a natural extension of what the characters would actually do. Eric, I did want to ask you, I've been so curious now for a couple of weeks. How did you feel about what Vernestra did and sort of the political role she plays in episode 8?
Yeah, this is, if there's something that the show does well, okay, I have to caveat that because Vernestra, okay, the short answer is I wish they had used a different Jedi for the Vernestra role of the person who covers it all up to avoid a scandal with the Senate at the time when the Senate is about to investigate the Jedi. I think that's a cool theme to explore. I love unpacking the politics here. But Vernestra in the comics and books is not this person. It is very hard for me right now to understand how she became this person. My understanding is there's going to be, actually, they have announced there's going to be some books about the High Republic, and one of them will explore kind of the lead up to how she became this person. Don't do that in a book. Don't take a character. If you need a character to do this, don't pick the one person that you're going to bring into this show as a connection to the books. You're bringing this person in. Leave them as they were. Not to say that nothing can change, but the core of who they are should not change. They should still be that person. And in the book, she's completely different. It just felt gratuitous to me to use her for this role where she is the bad Jedi. So, having said that, I love what's happening here with Senator Rayencourt and his, Jedi Investigation Commission, and this tense moment where we find the Jedi trying to hide things from the Republic so that they don't look bad, and trying to cover things up so that there isn't a public panic. They have a reasonable goal, which is they want to protect people, and if people don't trust the Jedi, they might not be able to do that well. But again, the road to hell's paved with good intentions. It leads them to cover things up from the Senate, and that's really problematic. And Senator Rayencourt is a really interesting person to use as the figurehead on the Senate side of things, because he makes this really interesting argument that the Jedi are... He basically says, you're too powerful to be left alone to police yourselves. If one of you turns to the dark side, how could anybody keep you in check? So the Senate needs to be watching over your shoulder more so that we don't get to that point. I would love to hear what the two of you think about this idea, because I think, as we see in the prequels, the deepening connection between the Jedi and the Republic actually helps lead to their downfall. It seals their fate. So I'm not sure that I'm fully on board for let's have more intrusive Senate oversight of the Jedi. On the other hand, we also know that a Jedi falling to the dark side is another part of what seals their fate. And could that have been avoided if the Senate were giving them essentially an audit of some of their policies? What do you guys think about this senator and what he's bringing to the table in terms of relationship between the Jedi and the Republic?
I think this is actually a really interesting idea. And I think the issue with the Jedi having greater oversight is not the Jedi having greater oversight. It's that the Senate itself, as we have discussed before, is a super weird and unwieldy and large and corrupt body. And So it's probably not the best organization to conduct that oversight, but I don't really know what would be. That what he said that I thought was really interesting was that the Jedi are pretending that you can control the uncontrollable, and that's not the Force, that's emotion. And I think that's a really interesting way to think about who the Jedi are and what they do, because it's not necessarily about controlling emotion. It's about finding equilibrium and not allowing any one particular emotion to rule you. But that's really hard. And you have instances like May, or like Osha, like Anakin, like any number of Jedi that struggle with emotions. And I think it's fair for an outsider to be like, you are pretending that you're so high and mighty, but you're not. And one of these days, you're a pressure cooker and you're going to explode. And I think that's a perfectly valid critique, particularly from an outsider.
Yeah, I think, people really want to make this analogy between the Jedi and police in the real world. And of course, in the real world, police have, and I think it's fair to say should have, oversight by third parties because they have a lot of power, and we want to make sure that they're using it wisely. And you can't always trust members of an organization to police themselves. In fact, oftentimes you can't. I think where that analogy falls apart is that the Jedi are not just super cops. There's more to it than just the fact that they have power and lightsabers and they can do magic. They have a connection to a higher power in a way that there's no analogy for in the real world. And that power is not just something they tap into to use, it's also something that sort of exists on its own beyond them and has a will and plays a role in the galaxy that we don't have a real world analogy for that. So this conversation about oversight of the Jedi and should the Senate be second guessing them and telling them to change their policies, it doesn't feel as clear cut as some of the real world analogies that I see out there. And I'm not saying like there should be no Senate oversight. I guess what I'm saying is this senator seemed confident that if the Senate is just kept informed about everything the Jedi are doing, we won't have another May, right? Or another, he doesn't know this yet, but another Anakin. And I don't think that's true because I don't think oversight can prevent that kind of corruption because, again, it happens in that private space between a Jedi and the Force. It happens in a way that I think is difficult to head off with just checks and balances. I don't know that would work as well as I think he wants it to.
Haley, how did you feel about the show ending on a romantic hand-holding note?
I mean, it's fine. Like, they're cute. They're both, it's a cute couple.
They are both very attractive.
I just wish they weren't so dumb, actively stupid. They're not even, smart bad guys. They're just, they have no, moral core. They're not even on, a righteous, vengeance kind of moment. It's just I guess I'm gonna go be bad now.
And again, this moment of them holding hands, which I understand was ad-libbed on the day, and definitely is a nice bone to throw to the shippers and the fanfic writers, and that's great. And I love that Leslie Headland is such a fan that she was excited about the idea of fueling the community with.
He murdered her friends in front of her.
Okay, so that's number one.
He sure did. Why is she over it?
But number two, it completely undermines this idea that she's only training with him to as part of a deal that they made under the tree where May stays behind and she's like, I'll go with you. That's supposed to be her. The generous read of that is she doesn't really want to do this. She didn't really turn to the dark side. It was a moment of rage, but she's agreeing to stay with Chimere because she wants her sister to be fine. I don't know why her sister couldn't be fine without that, but whatever.
But
that
she
final
lets
moment,
her sister get arrested without any knowledge of what's been happening.
Well, I think she trusts that the Jedi are not going to summarily execute her. Although,
but why would she trust that if she just went to the dark side because he killed her mom?
It doesn't make any sense. But
it's stupid.
My biggest problem is that that hand holding undermines the idea that this is not willful, that this is not that she's there begrudgingly. No, she's into it, and I understand it. Believe me, we've all seen Chimere shirtless. I understand it.
We sure have.
But the more I think about it, the more mad it makes me. And I don't want to be mad. Folks know I don't want to be mad at this stuff. I want to love and support these decisions that are being made, particularly by a creator who loves Star Wars. That's clear. I believe that she loves Star Wars. These are just bad decisions, and I feel really bad because this could have been so much better.
I just wish there was like a commitment. I'm fine with the romance, and I would have liked this show more if somehow he like actively seduced her to the dark side, and it wasn't even like that she needed the dumb sort of fig leaf to do it. Of like, oh, Soul did something that I don't even ask any follow-up questions about. I'm just gonna kill him. No, like I think it might have even been like a more fun story if it was just because he's hot. Like people are that stupid in real life. They are. And like that would have been more convincing to me, honestly.
Yeah, it's kind of like they're trying to have their cake and eat it too, where like show that she's turning to the dark side and that's bad, but also show that she's justified in it. And I think it was not super convincing writing. And just my biggest frustration is how much potential this show has. And, if there is a season 2, I'm really hoping that lives up to some of that potential. But I feel like a lot of it was wasted on not great writing decisions and compressed runtime. And there really is so much I liked about it. Like, I loved the wuxia style fight scenes. I thought it was very cool to see bleeding of the lightsaber from blue to red. We all know I loved having like a darker, more violent episode. I thought that was really fun and thrilling. I really liked some of the lore drops, and I liked the politics. And I thought the performances were really, really good. I thought the acting was really strong, even when the character decisions made no sense. I think the actor who played Soul, whose name I can't remember at the moment, did a really good job when he was making no sense. And I think Manny Jacinto did a really great job, and so did Amanda Stenberg. But it's just, there was a lot of wasted potential, in my opinion, and that's part of what's so frustrating, because there's so many nuggets that I really, really liked and I thought were cool and new and fresh and interesting, but wrapped in a package that was just messy and uneven, and ultimately I don't know how well executed the story was.
Yeah, I do feel kind of guilty now. I will add my own disclaimer here. I enjoyed parts of the show, and I liked the first several episodes. Probably until the last episode, I was locked in. I was like, give me the story. I really didn't like the conclusion, but like, maybe you'll get another season, and I will watch the next season, and I will hope that, like you're saying, Grace, the characters start to act more rationally.
Yeah, there's so much potential here, and there are so many good, references to other things in a meaningful way, and signs that Leslie Headland really does love Star Wars. I mean, I think, for those of us who read the books and are continuing to read the books, there's a reference to a hyperspace disaster, which is the reason that Brendok doesn't have any life on it. That's a reference to the event that kicks off the High Republic book series way back in 2021. That was a formative moment for the galaxy, and for Star Wars fans who've been reading these books for 3 years, that was a really nice little Easter egg to be like, oh, like this is all connected. Like that thing that happened on the page, it's affecting something on the screen. And you can't overstate how good it feels to be a diehard Star Wars fan who's read all the books and hears a character from one of those books, no less, mention that thing that only you and a relatively small group of other fans know about in this huge TV show. That feels great, and Leslie Headland clearly knows that, and I appreciate that she did it. But as you guys said, it's weighed down by the illogical nature of the core decisions that are being made here. Hopefully, frankly, I'll say this, as much as I've criticized the show, I do want a season 2, if only so that Osha could redeem herself and make a big show of realizing that she made a mistake, and actually you don't have to hand it to the dark side. The dark side is bad, and maybe we should go back to the good side. But speaking of season 2, there were a couple of big moments that everybody was talking about in the finale that are meant clearly to push us off onto season 2 on an exciting note. The first one is, of course, as Osha and Chimera leave his planet and fly away to go to Brendok, we see a figure lurking in the shadows, a creepy-looking
Who is
figure.
that guy, Eric?
Darth Plagueis, right?
It's Darth Plagueis. Leslie Headland has confirmed this. It's Darth Plagueis.
Wow.
So that is a huge, huge point of connectivity to the Sith lineage and the future that we know will end with Palpatine. So many questions, obviously, about what his specific role is. I think the primary guess is what I've been saying all along, which is Plagueis is Chimera's current Sith master, and he's realizing that his apprentice is taking his own apprentice, and he's going to cast him aside in season 2. Very exciting to see him there, and excited to see how that develops, because as we know, Plagueis is going to take another apprentice, presumably not long after this, and that's going to be Palpatine. So that's really cool. I appreciate the connection to the future of the Sith. It kind of just works timing-wise. It's not so far back that it doesn't make sense, and I would love to know how Chimera fits into Plagueis' plans, or if he's about to go by the wayside. That's cool. The other thing is the last moment of the episode, Vernestra had this cryptic scene earlier where she's on the phone with somebody and she says, I need to talk to him. I don't remember the line. And I assume that was about what we see her do at the very end, which is go in to talk to Yoda. I would love to know what the two of you think. Obviously, huge that we're even seeing the back of Yoda's wrinkled green head. Leslie Headland did say there would be no cameos from the movies. Obviously, that was not true, but we already saw Ki-Adi-Mundi. But he's here. She's going to talk to him. What is she going to talk to him about? Haley, I'd love to know your theory.
Me, my theory about Yoda, she's going to go in and say, I need your help. I'm such a doofus. I'm having a hard time. Where were you this whole time, Master Yoda? Why are you in this dark closet? I just feel like if he was out there and helping, it would be a very different story.
Yeah, I do feel like there'll be a bit of I done goofed in that conversation. I also think she's probably asking Yoda for help unearthing May's memories of Osha and Chimera. But what kind of tickled me was thinking about how this sort of if you tuck this into the larger narrative, this sort of adds backstory for why Yoda is so anti-young Anakin being trained. Because he's already seen what happens when an unstable 8-year-old with a tragic past and sketchy immaculate conception beginnings is trained, and it happened with May and Osha, and now it's gonna happen again with Anakin. And Yoda's just like, gosh darn it, don't we ever learn? And obviously they don't. But I thought that it kind of fleshes out that bit of Yoda lore in a way that I enjoyed.
Yeah, I think that she's probably there it's interesting because if she confesses to Yoda, does she really think he's not going to immediately tell the Senate? I mean, folks love to say, oh, Yoda is the biggest liar of them all. He covers up all these secrets from the rest of the council. I don't know exactly how many secrets he covers up there, and I don't like the idea that we're going to tarnish Yoda's stature as a person of integrity. So I'm not totally convinced she's going to tell him everything. I think we're meant to wonder about that. I think the way it was framed, we're supposed to be on the edge of our seat thinking she's going to unspool everything to him. But I think really what it's going to be is she will find some way to tell him that Chimera is still alive that doesn't involve revealing the whole story, and she's going to ask for Yoda's help finding Chimera. Again, I think we could see some element of unearthing May's memories, like you said, so I think that's going to be part of it, but I think this is about the hunt for Chimera, which is something I'm really interested to see in Season 2. We were correct, those of us who said that Vernestra was Chimera's master, so seeing kind of what happened there and how she goes to track him down and what she does when she eventually finds him, that's going to be really interesting. I don't anticipate Yoda being a big part of Season 2. I think this is kind of just a way of showing us like the stakes have been elevated to the point where the big boss needs to come in. But I do wonder how much she's going to tell him, because the more she says, the harder it is to believe that Yoda would keep it quiet. But that's just my perspective. As we close out here, I would love to know what your biggest question is that you would want to see answered in season 2. We've talked about some of the storylines we'd like to see, but what is the number one biggest thing that you don't understand about what happened in season 1 that you are hoping we'll get more information about in season 2? And I'm going to steal the easiest one because that's what we call moderator privilege, folks. And I'm going to say I want to know more about what the heck is going on with Osha and May's bond. We get this moment in the Brendok, the episode 7, where we find out there's a vergence on the planet, much like Qui-Gon sensed with Anakin. And Osha and May are two parts of one in some way. They have identical symbionts in the midichlorians. I don't understand what's going on there. What does it mean that they are two halves of the same whole? What will that mean for how they, continue to go about their lives, particularly with May not knowing any of this stuff anymore? Is that still buried in there? I think we need some answers there.
Isn't there an afterlife in Star Wars? Or do they just like melt into the Force? I know that's what Jackie was saying, but like Han Solo is like, no way in hell. Like, like he thinks there's a hell. So I'm just curious.
I think we can chalk that up to it was 1981.
Well, it's just like if you're two people, but you're one person, like what are your like I don't like that. I just don't get it. I don't super get it, but I agree with you that I would like to know more.
And the poem, the little chant, like where did they get that from?
Oh, that's creepy. They're so creepy. You're right.
There's a great moment there where I forget who it is, whether it's Osha or May, but she's like, where did we learn that from? Like, who taught us that? And which clearly I think if it were their mothers, they would clearly remember that, which suggests that it wasn't them. So like, who taught them that? That's so
creepy.
See, like things like that, it's like this could have been a like satisfying show to watch. What I want to learn more about is the noodles, the space noodles. I want to go back to the noodle bar from the very first scene. Check in on that guy.
What I want to learn more about is Chimere's workout regimen. I would like to see like some... I feel like it's within the realm of possibility that he could be doing like a shirtless Tai Chi scene in front of the water. I'd like that. I think that would be a nice little crumb for the fans and stands. But in terms of mystery, like true actual mysteries, the biggest one other than creepy twins is what happened to turn Chimere to the dark side. And if we find out with more of him being shirtless and having, big sexy eyes, then more's the better.
Is there a price that you would put on a Disney Plus add-on service where it's just Chimere workout videos? Like, what would you be willing to pay on top of the regular subscription cost?
This is a family show, Eric.
Oh, I'm just saying for workout inspiration. No, I'm just talking about like a Peloton type thing where you sort of do the lifts and the squats and stuff with him.
Well, I don't want to do the lifts and the squats with him. I would just, vibe.
All right, well, on that note, we're going to wrap up this episode. Thank you so much for listening. If you want to share your thoughts about the show or suggest future topics, you can email us at hothtakes@gmail.com, or you can find us on Twitter. We are at Hoth Takes. I am Eric Geller on Twitter, or X, whatever you want to call it. Grace is Grace_Seegers, and Haley is Birdnator. Haley made our wonderful logo and banner art, and I edited the show and put together our music. And as always, we want to point out, for legal purposes, all Star Wars music, sound effects, the whole 9 yards, it is the intellectual property of Lucasfilm. You can find a complete archive of past episodes on our website. That's hothtakes.wordpress.com. And if you like the show, please share it with a friend. You can find Hoth Takes on all the major podcasting platforms, including Apple Podcasts and Spotify. We'll see you next time. May the Force be with you.